All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to the Healthcare Innovation Panel here. We're going entitled "How to Start, Scale, and Sustain AI in Healthcare." And welcome, our distinguished panelists here. We heard several of them already earlier, but first of all, Joe Yoon, Director of AI Enablement for the University of Pittsburgh. David Edelman, Executive Advisor, Digital and Marketing Transformation with Edelman Advisory Services. Tony Noon, Senior Manager of Healthcare and Life Sciences with AMD. And our very good friend, Vinny Lee, Lead Technologist with Dell. Welcome, gentlemen. Appreciate your time here. So we'll do about a 35, 40-minute discussion, plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. But as we start off, kind of beginning the journey here, what's the why? The why behind AI in healthcare, and starting with the why with the AI journey. And David, I think we'll start off actually with you, just because you kind of went on your talk before this, talked a little bit about the personalization, but I know there's actually a better starting point. So let's maybe start off with a little bit of that, maybe some context and background on the personalization with AI and the opportunities there. But again, leading up to that, making room for AI in your organization. So maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, I think, God, what could be more personal than your health? Everybody's context is completely different. Everybody's mindset about what they value and what their ambitions are for their health, their family situation, and all the factors that either constrain or enable them to do things in health are completely unique. And so the only way, if we're really going to get ahead of helping people manage their healthcare, is to acknowledge that this has got to be personalized. We're in a situation now in society where we are going to have aging populations. We want them to age healthily. We all want to age healthily. It's an economic as well as an ethical situation. But in order to do that and provide the kind of support that's going to actually get ahead of that requires a hell of a lot of data. Data at a number of levels, data understanding what works in what situations, but also what works for an individual, and then data that can actually help people get that done. So all of that is a massive data problem from a number of different dimensions. I worked for Aetna, one of the payers, and certainly one of the things every insurance company would like is for their members to be healthy. If they're healthy, they're healthy. They save money, Aetna saves money, all is good, and we can maybe slow down the spiraling healthcare costs and costs of premiums. But making that happen is really hard because our healthcare system is incredibly fragmented. So when people do have issues, coordinating their care across all these different parties is a data challenge. But even figuring out what people should do is often a question of having tests and outcomes and all of that. So when we really started, when I was there, which was 2016 to 2020, one of the things that we felt was really important is empowering people to be able to do more with their healthcare. So one thing I talked about was personalized videos to get them up to speed on how health insurance worked. And then we extended that to people with certain kinds of conditions. Went through a bunch of different types of cancer and created content and video hubs that can explain to people how to think about their journey and the care that they can get and the different kinds of support and tools that they can use. And we started, but then we had to see what worked, what didn't, how to link that to all of their suppliers, all of their providers. So it's, at the highest level, healthcare is not just a constant battle to get people healthy, it's a constant battle of information, to solve problems, to move things along, and to motivate people to do healthy action. So I think just if we start there, we start to see a lot of different priorities for what we have to accomplish.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Joe, you spoke earlier today about how you engage healthcare from your perspective at the University of Pittsburgh, and obviously the medical center that you support. But what are some of the meaningful use cases that you've seen in your years in doing AI?
Yeah. So, just always to clarify, I know nothing about healthcare specifically. I'm not an actual doctor or a real doctor, like a professor, I guess. But so yeah, I know technology. I know how AI technologies specifically work. So I'm always leaning on the actual healthcare professionals to explain to me what are they trying to do. It's kind of like the conversation with company leaders. You know, how do you make money? Well, with the healthcare professionals, what are you trying to do? What is your research area? What are you trying to develop? And one of the most exciting things that has happened in recent years is that the University of Pittsburgh, I think they basically recruited three of the best experts in pathology. There's one guy that I think they literally, I think in their field, call him the Tom Cruise of pathology. But I don't know if that's because of looks or is it because of, just, I don't know. I don't know how to take it either, but they literally
Maybe he's
call him this.
5'1", who knows?
Right, yeah.
Tom Cruise is short.
And so they brought these three people together and they said, we want to create the most advanced computational pathology center in the world, which sounded exciting, but also it sounded possible, right? And the big thing that I try to do is I try to press acceleration, and I say that, okay, whatever you're trying to do, there's likely going to be components of this that you can just buy from the big players, right? And so let's see if we can accelerate those pieces, and then anything else that you need to develop in-house, which incidentally Dell provides the hardware for all of this research for us. Then we'll build those things in-house. But how can you accelerate the creation of not just naming the center, as I think it's called the Computational Pathology AI Center of Excellence, CPACE. It's not just a lot of universities are really good at naming centers and announcing something, right? But then to actually produce technology and outcomes that can go all the way to the clinical setting, that's a little bit less, doesn't happen as much, I guess. And so CPACE has been a real big success, and that's been something that I've been very proud of helping to support the architecture for.
Absolutely. So now moving over to George Clooney of our industry, Tony Nunes.
I thought you were talking about Vinny.
No, I know this morning when personalization was brought up, you kind of got very excited. You said, hey, let's make sure we bring this up on the panel. But what does personalization mean to you from not only from AMD's perspective and AI perspective, but you personally and
Well,
your
I had
strategy?
a lot of coffee when I made that statement.
Love it. So did I.
Yeah. You hear me okay?
We can.
There's so much I could say about that question. Dave is right. There is nothing more personal than healthcare. In my experience is 30 years as a technologist. I'm not a clinician. There is no industry where people feel more disconnected to the outcome than healthcare. And it's the result of a lot of things, technology being one of them. So during the last talk, there was a discussion around the people, process, and technology side as the complete three-legged stool for better outcomes, right? And you guys can make this discussion great. But there's this notion that hospitals are just simply behind the times or behind the curve in adoption of technology. That is not true. And I'll let Joe or Dave comment on that. Go to any hospital, walk through any of the critical centers, go to HIMSS, go to Health, any of the major conferences, and there you won't see a greater concentration of technology anywhere in any industry than in healthcare, as it should be. So what's the problem? We have 30 years worth of collection of data, of records that have accumulated, and because of regulatory reasons, they can't be discarded, and they have value, 10% of the value according to the model that you put up, right? Okay. There's the technology piece to make use of it, which is the other 20%. The other 70% is because we can't figure out how to actually do it. And if AI is going to do anything, and there's a multitude of use cases that come to mind that we could talk about, is the invisible hand that makes that a reality. AI, in my opinion, as a technology guy, should be invisible. It should just simply work to get the outcome. Now, getting to the outcomes is kind of the discussion that these two gentlemen, quite correctly are experts in. Okay. But in my view, it's this. If you're going to improve the outcomes in healthcare, it has to start with the people that are going to be the users of it, the patients, the clients. And there's an entire stratification of populations that are going to use technology in different ways. You had another quote that I took down: know where you are, or something along those lines. Being able to fit the technology to the populations you're trying to serve, and that could take a multitude of forms. I mean, Dave talked about all the different platforms that'll do risk stratification, that'll do multi-point variability analysis. Okay, it still requires someone to interact with the healthcare system, and it could be as simple as talking to a clinic with shut-in populations. Let me give you an example. I actually work on this one in New York City in one of the major medical centers. You guys know how many languages are supported at your average hospital in New York?
11.
Close to it, about 48. 48 different languages. It's actually more than that, but let's just say 48 major languages. The cost of translational services to maintain that is astronomical. So if you guys walk through the corridor, you saw Arnold the robot. With AI, I can teach Arnold the robot to speak any language. In fact, if you go to Grok or ChatGPT, I've tried this experiment. I speak 4 languages. I can switch from one to the other, and it can respond to me. Being able to interact with patients where they are in their own language, whether it's through a mobility app or when they walk into a kiosk at a hospital, automatically improves the overall experience. And if you can improve the overall experience, you cut down on mistakes. You cut down on dissatisfaction. You cut down on readmission, which is one of those criteria that all hospitals are trying to improve. Okay? Being able to explain to them what the process is going to be improves the outcomes. That's on the revenue side. There's the cost side that you guys have both talked about. And that has to do with the people in process on the operational side and how technology is adopted. Because if it's going to work, it's got to work within the existing workflow of the hospital. And that's where Vinny, and I'll let you jump in a second, come in to make that possible. You want to jump in there?
Sure.
So if I'm Brad Pitt, who am I?
George Clooney of healthcare.
Yes, you could be Brad Pitt. Yes, yes. You've got enough hair to be Brad Pitt. The interesting thing as a technologist who's kind of been in and around healthcare devices, I used to write code, right? So the concepts that sort of outline things like machine learning and those more baseline artificial intelligence sort of technologies have been around for a really, really long time. Like, so if you look at medical devices, it's interesting. I was just in one of our large major hospitals here in Boston last month, and like, oh, patient monitor, like that's why exactly what I used to build. And they're collecting ECG. So there's no shortage of devices that collect parametric physiologic data in a hospital, right? I know inherently like how that works electrically. There's electrodes and how we, I explained to my wife, like, well, there's like 6 waveforms there, like 2 of them are real, like the other ones are extrapolated. There's algorithms to do that. There's no shortage of that. There's DSPs in there. We detect algorithms. We've been doing this for decades, right? The challenge becomes, it's I think as Joe said in the other room, it's a data problem, right? You have all these disparate sources, including sources outside of the provider itself, and figuring out how that gets pulled together to create some meaningful insight, we'll call it, right? So we call it like in the biz, to go change behavior, right? Or I have family members who are doctors and oncologists and those kinds of, or how to translate that data into a treatment plan that you can apply to a patient. So the ultimate value in all of this, depends on what lens you're looking through. Mm-hmm. If you're a provider, you want to provide better clinical outcome. I have folks that are not well in my institution that I want to help make well and get them there faster with a bunch of interesting data that I might have. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when I used to work for another large silicon manufacturer, we used to talk about cradle to grave, collecting data for every individual in the world, right? So we're going to put it into a blockchain, and we're going to, that person was going to carry that stuff, like our kids, right? They're going to carry that history for the rest of their lives. And that becomes more of a lifestyle value prop. Hey, you're living in this part of the country, based on geography, your nationality, your age group, there are certain things that you probably shouldn't try to do that prolong your life, right? Those kinds of things. So, the tech is all there. It just becomes this question of like, how do you apply the tech? And then, of course, how you translate the interesting outcome from that analysis or that analytic or whatever it is to folks in a language that is meaningful to them. My sister-in-law is a radiation oncologist. She's like, hey, Vinny, this AI thing. Like, yeah, like what she wants is, she doesn't want to know what the GPUs and all the hardware is. She wants a sheet of paper that says, for John Smith, based on that analysis, this is what we'd recommend. And then she can apply clinical, treatment to it.
Absolutely.
Right?
So picking up on that
If
one.
I can jump in on that one. You may be forced to jump into what Vinny just said sooner than you think. And I wanted to ask you this question earlier, and I'll let you guys comment on this. So last week, there was a new executive rule that was imposed on CMS. So CMS is the payment system for healthcare. And you're now going to be given the control of your own data to be able to share it between different networks and different institutions. So kind of the thing you were talking about with Tim Berners-Lee, which is, I think the concept was called the egg with
It was a wallet.
with blockchain or wallet. Yeah.
It's not. It's actually not on blockchain, but it's similar concept.
Yeah. So this is all going to become a reality, and it will be imposed through just force of law, and it's going to be interesting how that's going to change the behavior of not only patients but the institutions that are serving those patients. And you guys can comment on that if you like.
Yeah, actually, that was first talked about 4 years ago, and it was all around interoperability. And at Aetna, we started planning for that, especially for the Medicare population, which CMS was going to. And the interesting, one of the most important things, though, was even though the data could be moved around, who's the orchestrator? Who's the one looking? Is it just sequential? That even if you own your data, are you going to have somebody look over all of it? And of course, the natural thing would either be a primary care physician or specialist or somebody, depending on your condition, who can see all that and pull it together. But even with a lot of patients, there's comorbidities and complexities. And so one part of the whole problem is getting the data and moving it around. Another comes back to roles and process and who should look at that data, who could have an agent on their behalf look at that data and provide recommendations. So while that's good that we're creating that, the mechanisms, we're not thinking through the process enough to create the value. So this is where experiments with medical centers who do have integrated care, some of which also have the payer as part of it, completely integrated. I mean, you guys, Kaiser, things like UPMC, you're all integrated, is a great place to start really experimenting with that and figuring out how to make that work. Are you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Excellent. So, and you both touched on this a little bit, but how do you, I mean, maybe like short answers here, because we have a lot to get through. Moving from interest to investment. So let's start off with David in this regard, because obviously with Aetna, and you talk about some of your relationships in the last several years on how people see these use cases, but now it's time to actually implement. It's time to go. So how would you comment there?
Yeah. So one of the most important things going into one of these things is, what do we think the value is that we could unlock? And often you don't know how much you're gonna, you don't know. And so you've got to take a sensitivity analysis. So for example, one of my clients is a big pharma company, and they feel as though physicians are going to be overwhelmed with all the new drugs that are tied to genetics, and they're not going to be able to understand and do it. So they're creating an AI capability to help physicians sort through all the drug combinations and figure out for different diagnostic states what to do. So what's the value of that? How do you even figure the value of that? It's very hard to. But yet they have to make investments against it. So it's really around incremental. So given what the investment might be, how much more could we sell? And so it becomes, in many cases, a sensitivity or break-even analysis, because just simply trying to use assumptions to come up with a straight ROI is you're putting assumptions on top of assumptions, and they have no value.
There you go.
So it's a lot more practical to just say, well, if we only increase by 5%, we have this, it'll work. So let's not only do it, but let's also tune all the processes and everything around to, at a minimum, get 5%, but let's really aim for 10, 20, 30. And so that's often with AI, and I've seen this in other situations where they think right out of the gate, oh, we can let go of these 10 people and make these savings. Well, think about it first. What would be the break even? And then figure out how to get there, because you may not necessarily decide to let those people go. It may not be that easy to do. You may repurpose them. You may find there's more work for them to do. So much more of a sensitivity and break even is what I found has worked.
That's excellent. Joe, what are your thoughts there, moving from interest to investment?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to speak more towards the university side and the relationship between the medical center. So using this pathology as center as an example. So everybody on the health sciences, College of Medicine side are also healthcare professionals on the UPMC side. So they have, and actually get double salaries too, which is pretty amazing. So what's really cool is from the pathology side of things, as we're building out the center, and again, this is not necessarily just to plug Dell, but the way that this worked out is so beautiful, which is we said, okay, there's certain things that the center needs to build computationally with regards to algorithms. And so we'll build that out and invest and pay for, Dell hardware. But there are certain companies, certain startup technologies that sit within the portfolio of Dell Technologies Capital, which is, I guess that's like Michael Dell's VC arm, but that are very healthcare focused, and they have very specific pathology applications. And so let's see if we can just, through our relationship with Dell, build partnerships with those startups to then directly accelerate what we're doing in the research side. And then what was really interesting was that there was Dell Giving, charitable foundation, or not, I guess not charitable, the charitable arm, whatever that's called, that said, hey, we really care about accelerating medical research in this specific realm. And so that was kind of, we found this perfect triumvirate of forces, all within the Dell ecosystem that is accelerating how we are progressing computational pathology right now. And so, I don't know about with regards to any investment we made. It was more just connecting the dots of people that could be aligned in proper ways to accelerate this thing.
Absolutely. Tony, quick question for you. How do you recommend, and you've done a lot of thought leadership over the past year and a half on this one, but what are some of the tenets to modernizing the IT investment for these healthcare organizations? What are some of the tenets there?
Yeah, I'm going to be selfish because I do work for AMD. Part of my job is not to talk about other processor manufacturers. My greatest enemy is actually inertia. And I spend most of my time changing the conversation so that people will start considering elements that they normally would take for granted. And the processor is one of those. And by extension, the CPU as well. And Vinny can go through the differences necessarily. But it's this. It's not just a question of performance. At AMD, we have tremendous performance. And, as I'm fond of saying to Vinny, we make engines, Dell makes the cars. And we make really, really great cars. But what comes with that? Because to be able to do all of these different different use cases that Dave talks about and that Joe is doing at the University of Pittsburgh requires a certain amount of normalization in the data center, modernization, if you will. And it's not just simply performance, but what that brings. So there's the element of the cost of maintaining the data center from an environmental standpoint. That has to be reduced. And the only way that's going to be done is if I can actually increase the amount of free space I have in the data center by consolidating onto higher performing platforms. Okay, so reductions. And we have models that we've worked with where we have 7-to-1 reduction in some cases using AMD. The second thing, if you talk to anybody in healthcare IT, they're going to complain about the cost of virtualization, which is a serious consideration. How do I lower the overall cost of the virtualization layer, given the parameters of how licensing is done these days? Well, given that AMD has more denser cores than anybody else in the world, that means you need fewer cores to maintain a certain level of performance, but that also means that the cost based upon cores is dramatically lower. So with this in mind, if you're trying to find the savings to be able to adopt AI in whatever use case you're talking about, you've got to make sure that the structure in the existing operational model that you're using is in its most efficient form possible. And that's kind of what I do and what Vinny and I do together on a day-to-day basis is making sure that normalization, that modernization of the data center is in place. You can adopt AI without doing this, but you're missing a lot of the benefits from the cost side of the model by not taking this into consideration. You want to make that great?
Yeah. So So I think we're at a very interesting crossroads in the industry, actually across a variety of industries. Right, there is this propensity towards wanting for organizations of all varieties, of all types, to bring in and leverage this magical thing called AI. Right, and I think there's from a consulting perspective or a professional services perspective, as Dell, we try to help customers come to some articulation of what that value might be. So there's sort of that layer of it. Once you find all right, this is interesting. I got a place, as Joe said, like, well, how do you make the money? Like, well, and I say, in EBCs, if I don't help you make a buck, save a buck, or do it faster, I'm not really doing my job here for you guys, right? So once you land on the interesting thing that you might want to do with something like an AI, how do I get that into my house? And that is where, as a technology company, we're trying to find ways to literally, keep the car on the road going down to 80 miles an hour and change the tires at the same time. And oh, by the way, I got to haul a trailer behind it all of a sudden while I'm doing that, right? So this is the interesting crossroads we're at. There is, and I tell folks, this is a great time to go shopping. It really is. The technologies that are available in platforms today are unlike anything the industry has had in the last 20 years. To the extent that what Tony is touching on, you can leverage those technologies to dramatically reduce a physical footprint and reduce the operational expense associated with running the things that normally run your business. It could be any business. Well, why is that important? Well, because I want to bring in this new technology based on GPUs or based on new tech or new network or new storage, but unless I have a place to put it, even if I have the most interesting, wonderful use case in the world, I'm not going to be able to get it into my house. So I like using house analogies. This is like I have a single family house. I got to build an addition to it, but I don't have land to do it on.
Right.
Joe
So
knows how to build.
right. So right. So we bring in right. So that's the whole thing. It's like we're trying to recoup some space and recoup some capacity and take the spend that and the equity that is locked into existing infrastructure and free it up. So you have an opportunity to build something new that can provide you that value, at the same time keep the lights on and keep the operations going. And it really is a great time to do that. It's completely doable. And this is kind of like down at the baseline of like, all right, like let's look at the foundation of your house. And and I always say from a modernization perspective, at Dell, we sell boxes, is what I tell folks. It's like, it's not just about the boxes. The boxes are really interesting, they are. But I also tell customers this is an amazing time to also pop the hood on the car and inspect the health of the application. So in my travels, I'm the workload guy. I'm like, hey, I want to talk to DBAs. I want to talk to application owners. I'm going to talk to your EMR folks. Let me tell you, like, how is that thing running? And can we, while we're changing out the tires and bringing in faster engines and all that sort of stuff, can we modernize parts of your software stack? Because software has changed a lot in the last 20 years too. So there are surprisingly institutions that are buying shelfware, and it's like no fault for doing that, but some of that shelfware is 20 years old. And the ISVs that produce that software don't want to let you know that it's 20 years old. And oh, by the way, you can buy this new version of a thing that's 10 times faster, but they don't want you to do that. So all I'm saying is, while you're looking at the new house, it's a great time to go furniture shopping too.
Right. Well, and I think even that's a great point for Dave. And your first talk this morning, you brought up the importance of making room for AI, looking to where you can maybe possibly save some money. And Tony touched on that. But Dave, from your talk this morning in personalization, but even before you get to personalization, you have to free up some capital, free up some spend to invest, to scale. So I'd give you the floor there for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, the money to do that still requires investment capital and OpEx to get over the hump. And efficiency use cases are just a useful way of going after it. It also gets people starting to use the muscle of AI to be able to do things faster, smarter, more automated ways. It gets conversation, experimentation going faster, and frankly, in a lower risk way in many cases than in things that directly face the customer, where you could be exposed. So in my world, marketing, basically things like going end to end to get content creation and emails out the door, that's a good place to start. For healthcare, you're not going to have it completely automated. You need compliance in the loop. There's going to be humans there, but you can still automate a heck of a lot more than before. You can also completely rethink ways you're doing personalization and testing on your website, in your app, things like that, where there's back office things that can provide efficiencies and require fewer people to do things. Just think about like the Polar example I talked about earlier today of you just don't need data scientists to query the data.
Right.
Marketers on the front line can do that. That doesn't necessarily mean you fire the data scientists because they're probably busy with a lot of other things, but it allows you to go faster, eliminate backlogs. So going for efficiency matters, and I think there's, oh my God, so many opportunities. I mean, I love the translation, the language translation. I mean, what an efficiency play, while also customer-facing and value in and of itself. So there's just a lot of things. I'll just get one more example that's completely different, is getting eligibility files from employers of who's now enrolled for insurance. And they come in all different formats, and employers have all these different ways that they code things and stuff. And it was a manual mess to bring all of that stuff in and have armies of people looking at that. Well, AI now is completely streamlining that. It's actually looking at the data, creating clear headers, normalizing the order of things, bringing that in. One of my insurance clients said, that frees up literally 10 people. They'll have to decide what to do with that, but you can start with things like that.
It's excellent. Excellent. Joe, next, and this is probably right on the horn here, but what are some of the biggest organizational shifts needed? This is about scaling with AI, but what are some of the biggest organizational shifts needed now? And to give some advice to CIOs and CXOs.
I mean, I think this is just broadly true. This isn't going to go away.
Right. That's a good point.
Right? And so everybody, no matter what your job is, you have to be leaning into this. If you don't, you are going to be one of the people that could potentially be laid off or whatnot. And again, this is not because I'm some king of knowledge or something like this. It's happening, right? It's the data and the progress shows this. And I think about things such as, my work with regards to AI for medicine. It has nothing to do with the way that administration works in the medical center, right? But I look at that whole thing. Has anybody ever tried to schedule a colonoscopy?
Right.
Right? I mean, what? And I have silence unknown callers, right? And the number is always different when it calls my phone. So it's like phone tag to just schedule a colonoscopy because there's 100 numbers that the hospital uses. And I swear, I'm just thinking Calendly. Like, can we just create a Calendly for colonoscopy? I mean, there's so much of that even within the administration of hospitals, medical centers, And so all of that stuff, somebody is going to figure out how to automate those things. And so therefore everybody has to be leaning into, okay, what parts of my job are completely automatable at some point, right? And then what other value can I bring? Which I genuinely believe that in the future, it's not going to be an AI dominated society. It's going to be an AI assisted human society, right? But we have to lean into that, because if we don't, then people will push towards an AI dominated society, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing. It's not just for healthcare, it's for all industry that we have to lean in. Every single one of us have to lean into this.
To that point, I had John Halamka, the president of Mayo Clinic platform, on a radio show a couple weeks ago, and he said, if you are not using AI, this is his opinion, if you're not using AI in diagnosing and looking through your records, within 2 to 3 years, it could be seen as malpractice. You're literally not enabling AI in your practice with your medicine. So somewhat controversial to say, but I do believe that. So to your point is you got to lean in. So
It's not. Let me just ask Joe and Dave this, because I like what you just said.
Thank you.
There's this ever-present fear around AI out there, and that it's going to be Armageddon. Everyone's watched Terminator. Okay, so there is this palpable fear around the adoption of this technology, and you're bombarded every other day with it's going to eliminate every single job, which is silly and not possible, but emotionally it feels true. So overcoming this is the first stage to be actually being able to embrace it, that you shouldn't be afraid. Yep. And what do you guys see? And it's as much a question for Joe as it is for Dave in that regard.
Oh man, I mean, maybe the most for me, the one that I experience the most is within a university campus. So think about faculty using AI or allowing for AI usage or not allowing for AI usage in the classrooms, and then banning AI from the classrooms. You're putting the students at a disadvantage because they're probably still going to use it, but then now they might be accused of cheating and all these things, right? Yeah, it's scary. And I'm also going to say, as somebody that has a little bit more technical of a background in this, is that I'm afraid of Terminator 2. Like I seriously, like nobody who of us can predict the future, right? So there's possibly scenarios where things are less than optimal, right? But again, I think the whole idea is we have to be the ones controlling the outcomes, and we have to be the ones controlling the progress, right?
Absolutely.
And so if we completely turn our backs on it, and I realize because of the fear, there's a lot of people that turn their backs on it. But even when the university setting, what I can tell you is that those folks are, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's not going to work out probably, right? And so I think at the end of the day, what I've been doing is, because I'm not great at trying to convince people, well, maybe none of us are great at convincing anybody to change their position on anything, right? But it's just, if there's people that really want help and that want to change, want to advance, then I'm more than happy to try to do my best to help in those situations. And I think over time, people will just, more and more people will realize that you have to do this.
Dave, is there anything you want to say, mention to Tony's point, or even organizational shifts that are needed, or advisement that you give?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things organizations can do right now is get it in people's hands and train them. Start creating things like hackathons and opportunities to share notes. I mean, one of my clients mandates that every department on a monthly basis have a lunch where everyone gets together and talks about cool things they've done with their AI capabilities. And so just at a minimum, making it part of the fabric of how the company operates, and then offering opportunities for people to learn more tools. But even just like that, within a company, getting experimentation going, because nobody knows all the answers, and there's always going to be new prompts, new capabilities, new ideas that people come up with. And so getting it into people's hands, that's absolutely critical. So question for any of your companies, how is leadership deploying just even basic access and training and discussions? It starts with that. So that's what's going to take for people to be comfortable. If it's always an arm's length away and other things are happening, they're going to go by what they read and everything, versus just doing it themselves and starting to see how they become smarter, more capable, more scalable, and maybe even more productive and have free time. So I think as leaders, we have to, first step is access.
Excellent.
So can I really quick piggyback on that? So again, I love what David just said. So one of the things that we do, one of our offerings, I guess, for my company is that we give our customers what we call private GPT, but these are really just open source builds that the focus is on private and secure generative AI environment where your data will never be sent back to a model for retraining, right? That's the whole focus of this offering. But the purposes of that is so that the company leadership can then say to everybody, this is a safe generative AI environment playground. Just go in there and just play around. They have competitions where they'll give gift cards for just most time in the system, and they're not monitoring what's happening. They'll just look at logs, right? And even if you're just fooling around and failing at everything, but you're just playing around in the system, you get a gift card, right? And then they'll have people self-present. They'll say, give us your best outcomes, and then they even have awards for the worst. You know, you tried something and it was terrible. Well, that'd be something we can all laugh at, and then you get awarded for that. Because the whole idea is we provide you a safe environment, and then you just get rewarded for just trying anything and everything in this environment. I think that's kind of what it goes to what David is saying. And things like that, I think, would be really helpful for companies.
And one thing there before you hand over to Vinny, what's really, really important is you're also curating what goes into that language model, which is critically important. People haven't quite realized that, or we don't talk about that quite enough. I've been trying to do a little bit more, but when you have your own language model and you curate what goes into it, because garbage in, garbage out, we all know that from our day-to-days back in 20, 30 years ago. But now, when you curate what goes into that language model, you're controlling it. Intelligent data, where you're pulling those sources. So I truly believe that. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say the pet peeve of mine, for the AI for the masses, right? So if you look at broadly across organizations, I almost wish you would not call it artificial intelligence, because I think there's two major buckets that you can compartmentalize AI technologies and their use cases. One is for most organizations, and kind of to your question, Justin, what do you see changing? I do see the promise of leveraging artificial intelligence for things like productivity enhancement. I think that's a really good place for organizations to adopt this thing called AI. Stop calling it AI, but just call it productivity, right? Mm-hmm. My wife, who's in academia, said, hey, I got this thing. It's like Google something. Do you know what this is? It was basically Google's version of ChatGPT. So, I see what they're doing. In your institution, to your point, they want to contain, right? So that's their instance, and I totally get that. So if you can figure out how to use and leverage that as a productivity enhancer, so that the repetitive, mundane tasks get done there, and you spend your valuable time doing more creative, more proactive, more student outcome-based stuff, that's probably what the promise is. The other big bucket is really the leading edge, bleeding edge uses of AI. So I always say that's where value and science kind of marry up. And that's in the backyard of Boston here, right? That's where the guys that are they're PhDs and they're medical doctors. Oh my gosh, how incredibly smart are you? You're sitting there plowing through, and this is pages out of Tony and I's past history, the 10 petabytes of imaging and pathology data to go find some interesting thing. That's the science. That's where the AI magic actually starts to take form. But eventually the work that's done there emerges as this digestible thing.
Yeah.
What that is, it has to be shrouded in user interface and shrouded in some more easily digestible thing for a clinician to understand, where they don't care about the tech, right?
Yeah.
So I think organizations who should be looking at these tools as tools makes your life easier, do stuff faster, right? But then the science part is just the science. And
so let's close with that. We have about 30 seconds apiece to close there. I think you just actually kicked us off with Vinny well. What's one piece of advice each of you would give to a healthcare executive about getting started now with AI? So, Vinny, you could touch on it a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say find a use case. That's always where it starts. I mean, I think what Joe and Dave said in the other sessions is that what's the value of the business? It could be shelfware, I mean, there's definitely AI things you just buy off the shelf. And, oh, it's a spec based. I need to buy a box. It has to look like this. I start using that, and I do some interesting outcome. If you're a teaching hospital, you've got grant money. That's where you're doing the science, right? So find a use case and see if you can monetize it and provide some interesting clinical benefit to your contingent.
Excellent. Tony?
Make it small. Don't buy a Christmas dinner. Buy a ham sandwich.
There you go. It's excellent.
And have some well-defined outcomes that can be measurable. A few years ago, people just buying GPUs willy-nilly, and then they're sitting there with only 20% utilization after a large investment of money. That's not the model that you should be looking at. Start something small project. Maybe it is digital pathology. Maybe it's reading DICOM images off of a modality. I don't know. But something that can be proven and you can measure the results and then extend that. This is the first time where more complex technology is making the process simpler. I can't think of another example as glaringly obvious as AI to do that. And to me, that's how you're going to actually make this successful.
It's excellent. Dave?
Yep. So building on those, because I completely agree with what they both said, but think about what will you do if it goes right? So what else around just using the AI we should change because this works? Is there a change in roles? Is there a change in decision authority? What access to certain things? And you need to be thinking about it in parallel, because if it does go right, you're going to want to scale it, but that's where things go wrong. And so really thinking through as you're doing this, what are some of the ripple effects if this works?
It's excellent. Joe?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the use case, but I'm going to say 2 use cases because of how different healthcare is compared to, I think, every other business in reference to how people feel about it, right? So I would say 2 use cases. One is a use case that's quick, but that reduces price, right? The consumer felt price.
That's great.
The second one is a use case that inspires people, right? So is there something that you can do where people feel inspired? And I don't think generally we're inspired by healthcare, and we need to be because it is inspiring. It's an inspiring field, and I think we need to think about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I know we're at time, but any quick questions, quick thoughts here? I got one last session across the room. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent.